final phase is when a company has been able to successfully leverage technology and information to improve their competitive advantage. Tell us why technology is so important to this process.
Vaishali, it's really important because this is where you really change business models in a company. And the best example I can think of is Procter & Gamble. And I talked about Filippo Passerini, Group President of Global Business Services and CIO. And what he did was really interesting. His whole goal, and he's got a PhD in statistics, so he's very analytical when he speaks. The other thing, he's very Italian. So when you talk to him, it's like, you can't help but smile. He's just so charming. What he did is he said, we've got to help the business make, and I'm using the quote, well-informed business decisions. And those few words formed a strategy that changed the way Procter & Gamble does business. So he was seeing a study from MIT Sloan that historical analytics and sales analytics was really being replaced by digitation of data, visualization of data, data analytics, scenario planning. And he thought about that and he said, that makes a lot of sense. So what he did is, one of the things that challenged Procter & Gamble as he sat in meetings, and he's been with the company a very long time, and just to put it in perspective, Procter & Gamble is an $80 billion company. They are really concerned about the marketplace and who's buying and who's not buying, and if it's on a supermarket shelf, what's the position of it. But when people were in meetings talking about market share and consumer changes, they would also always be arguing about the data. And he said, wait a second, I've got to create what he termed information democracy across Procter & Gamble. And so how did he do it? So he did it a couple of ways. One is he created one database of information. So there's no dispute as to the data. There's one set and everybody has it. Then the question is, how do we make sure that when people have to make decisions, workers, managers, executives, CEO, the board, what's the best way for them to make a decision? So I talked earlier about the MIT study and about visualization. So he came up with a strategy on, and he called it digitize, visualize, and simulate. So what does that mean? So the first thing he did on the digitize strategy is that for each person who's working at a workstation, they usually look at data, and you know what data looks like. It looks like in an Excel spreadsheet with columns, and you look at it and you get blind, and you go, okay, what does all this data mean? So what he did was he rendered the data graphically in what he calls a digital cockpit. So you think about a pilot flying a plane. And what that data was, it was rendered graphically to provide the analytics around the data, so the worker who's managing a process or performing an activity can actually see the implication of the data, and they can make a decision quicker. So that was his digitized strategy. Okay? The visualized strategy is really interesting. So I don't know if you've ever been part of a focus group, Vaishali, but so you bring people in, and Procter & Gamble will physically build a shelf, and then they ask people, what do you think? And they go, oh, why don't you move that bottle over here? And someone gets up and moves the bottle. And they go, well, the shelf isn't designed right, the display. So they gather all this information, and then they say to the focus group, thank you, let's come back in a month. They rebuild the displays, they move stuff around, they bring them in. Okay. So he said, enough of this. Let's digitize this and create a virtual shelf. So picture a whole slew of monitors together that displays a shelf in a grocery store with all the products. The focus group comes in, same scenario. They may say, well, you know, the display on that bottle, instead of red, it should be green. Data analyst goes, click, 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 and it's done. So what he was able to do with this visualization strategy on the virtual shelf was really improve the development time of product launches. And what he did with simulation is interesting. So people meet in a conference room and they look at all the data. And so what he did is he created what's called a business sphere. That was the first conference room, was more of a sphere. So he had digital TV monitors throughout the room displaying data just like the digital cockpit. And in that meeting was a data analyst who understood the data, understood the market, understood the implications of the data. So when, let's say, a product team was getting together and they were looking at what was going on over in Western Europe in a specific country, they could get a graphical display, they could click into data, the data analyst can talk about what the implication of that data is, and then they could get to making decisions very, very quickly. So those are the three strategies that have really transformed how Procter & Gamble does business.